Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second recording of Beauj Box 2026. We are tasting this guy, there. This little cute little drawing painting here. That's actually the winemaker's kid's drawing of vines and leaves. Essentially, that's what that is supposed to be. In case you were wondering what this modern piece, masterpiece was all about, it was drawn by a 3-year-old kid. Anyways, 2024 Bodillard Laforest Beaujolais-Villages is what we're tasting today. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, but you all know I sound like an asshole when I pronounce French. So, anyways, here we are. I know I promised last week that we're going to go through the grid and explain that more in details, which we're going to do. But I didn't want to make the recording so long last week, so cut that up, but we'll go through that today. We're moving away from Beaujolais, we're moving up north. We kind of talked about last week that Beaujolais-Villages, Beaujolais is kind of focused on sorry, let me hold on. Something's happening with my camera. There you go. Sorry about that. We talked about how Beaujolais is kind of divided into these two sections, right? There's the southern section and the northern section. If you pull up the map, so if you have the France map, so you get an idea where Beaujolais is. It's at the southern tip of Burgundy. If you see that Paris, it's kind of in the smack dab in the center, just east of the smack dab in the center of France. So light pink area in that map, the French map that you're gonna get, you have. And then if you look at the Beaujolais map, or the map named Beaujolais, you see how the Beaujolais, that light pink area, and the most of southern or the eastern part of Beaujolais, that's where we were last week. And now this week we're going up north, the northern half, and that's where all the crus are. That's where the quote unquote the better Beaujolais comes from. But we are particularly in Beaujolais-Villages, which is that kind of a light purple. Is that the right color? Yeah, light purple area on the western side, so the left of those multicolored crus that exist there. So it can come from anywhere around there. And we talked about how soil type changes here. Beaujolais, the southern part of Beaujolais, the soil type varies depending on where you are, but it's in general it's a lot more sandy soil, so you're not going to get a whole lot of minerality or complexity or structure to the wine. It's going to be a lot more fruit forward, and it's kind of easy, quaffable drinking wine, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's just stylistically that's what you're going to find in Beaujolais. But as now we're getting into Beaujolais-Villages, that area, you're going to start to see a lot more granite start to actually enter the picture, and granite is essentially what defines Beaujolais, and that's kind of what we talked about last week. But so you start to see a lot of granite entering the picture here. But this particular cru, or this particular wine, is this vineyard for this wine is located just outside of Morgon. Planted on these really steep hills. A lot of these Beaujolais-Villages is not only the granite that's coming in, but Beaujolais on the south is much flatter and sandy soil. And then once you get to Beaujolais-Villages, now you start to see some rolling hills, and the slopes start to enter the picture. And anytime the grapes are planted on the slopes, it's usually favorable, just because that angle gives a more exposure to the sunlight and UV rays, which helps with the ripening of the fruit, the sugar, the phenolics, and all these different things in the wine. So you like wines that are planted on the slopes, and you start to see those slopes enter. You start to see some elevation changes in Beaujolais-Villages. There's a file that you're going to get with this. It's a Beaujolais-Villages soil map. And I know this is in French, but if you look on the left, you see how there's that kind of a reddish color that kind of pops out on the left side. That red is the granite. The green is kind of like the volcanic soil. So the red is essentially what you're gonna find everywhere there. So you see how compared to where we were in Beaujolais last week, which is if you go to all the way to the bottom of that of the Beaujolais, you start to see some of the yellow kind of yellow down there. That's essentially what's covered all the way through the southern Beaujolais. But here, as you get up to the Beaujolais-Village, you start to see a lot more granite and the volcanic kind of different soil types start to enter. So obviously, depending on where the vineyard is exactly located, obviously some of it is going to be more volcanic, some of it is going to be more granite. But in general, this is where you start to see granitic influence on the Beaujolais wine or on Gamay, which is exactly what defines Beaujolais, what makes Beaujolais special. So let's talk about who makes the wine, and you're gonna get these pictures. So currently, it's run by the family winery. The estate is run by Renaud Bodillard. He's a fifth generation winemaker. He's a young guy, and you see a picture of him. You get a picture of him with this recording. But Bodillard family has been growing grapes in Beaujolais, southern Burgundy, Mâconnais area for 5 generations. But it wasn't until the 4th generation Bodillard, which is André Bodillard, and you got a picture of André Bodillard as well, established a family estate in 1986. They started bottling their own wine. So before that, they were just growing grapes and selling them to different co-ops or different winemakers and different people, but they never made their own wine. But it was André Bodillard, the 4th generation, who started the winery, the family estate, and then started bottling their own wines. And that was in 1986. And in 2011, André passed the baton on to Renaud, and then now Renaud makes the wine as well as farms the grape. They all they're estate grown, meaning they grow and farm all their fruit themselves. So now Renaud oversees 12 hectares of a certified organic, biodynamic practicing vineyards. Like I mentioned, in Beaujolais as well as in Mâconnais, south end of Mâconnais as well in Burgundy. So they make not only in Beaujolais, they make wine not only in Beaujolais-Villages, but they also make wine in other crus. Currently, they make it in 4 different crus. Probably the most notable one is Morgon, because their family estate is located just outside of Morgon. But they also make wine in Saint-Véran, which is in Burgundy, little sub-region in Mâconnais in Burgundy. So that's who they are. We're talking about very much of a family, Beaujolais family or Burgundian family that's been steeped in this area for quite some time, 5 generations. So they've been here for a while. So what is this wine? This is 100% Gamay, grown at the age of 50 to 80 years old. So quite a bit of a decent amount of age on it. Grown on sandy granite soil on steep slopes at 500 meters of elevation. So again, we're starting to see some elevation change, right? 500 meters. It's not the highest, but it's not nothing. And then you got some steep slopes here. So it's actually steep enough that the machine harvesting is really not possible here. So everything is hand harvested. Everything's actually entirely done by hand, entire farming, all of it. And again, growing on granitic soil. Southwest exposure, which is obviously a good thing. South exposure is always a good thing. Certified organic, biodynamic practicing, cultivated entirely by hand because on steep slopes. And then all the vines are trained traditionally in bush vines, meaning there's no trellises. Oftentimes in America, most grapes are almost all entirely. I don't know of any really bush vines unless you go to some old vines in California, where the ones that missionaries planted back in 1800s. But we're talking about bush trained vines, which are just kind of like, they look like just gnarly trees with gnarly alien arms coming out. So I've included some pictures, and that's very typical in this area. You're going to find a lot of bush vine, very traditional farming method here, or bush vine training method. But you're going to get some pictures. I included some pictures. So there's a picture of bush vines in spring, That one is probably the most striking looking because there's no leaves, there's no fruit on it, and you just see this gnarly, just kind of things. It almost looks like alien bodies, alien creatures that are like growing out of the earth. And then after that, you got bush vines during the harvest in fall. So you see some people harvesting the grapes, and then that's kind of what it looks like. And then you got some bush vines in the winter, so you kind of get a sense of what they all look like during different seasons. But this wine is also very traditional in this area. Traditional fermentation, meaning it's a semi-carbonic. So whole cluster, just kind of all laid gently on top, and then let it just kind of sit there. They do it in a concrete vat. They ferment and age in concrete vat, which is also very traditional and common in this place. So they layer these whole cluster vines in there gently, trying not to break skin as much as possible, but it isn't going to break because all the weight from the top is going to crush down onto the bottom. So there's going to be some bacterial yeast bacteria fermentation that happens on the bottom of the vat. CO2 level rises, obviously, right, because it farts out CO2. And then it goes up. Parts of the wines, grapes are basically capped under without the oxygen, so anaerobic environment. So that's how the carbonic starts. And then as the carbonic starts, which is an intracellular enzymatic fermentation, so the fermentation starts from the inside. As the pressure builds and the berries pop, juices come out. They come in contact with the yeast cells on the outside of the skins. They ferment again, producing more CO2, and then whole process just kind of goes on its own. So they do that semi-carbonic for about 10 days in concrete vats, and then afterwards there's no added yeast. It's all native yeast on the skins that kickstart the fermentation. And then after the fermentation is complete, they rack it off. Basically, they take all the juice off of the skins, and then they let it age in concrete vats for 4 months. And then this Bodillard does add a little bit of sulfites. They add about 40 milligrams per liters of sulfites added at bottling, which is in the grand spectrum of things really nothing. But yeah, compared to last week's wine, which was 0.0, this is quite a bit of a departure, and you will see it. Like the wine feels a lot more kind of correct, more correct, I guess is the best way to say it. Last week, I think one of the adjectives that I used to describe the wine was like feral. Like it was wild, it was feral, it was just kind of like, out there. But this one seems a lot more like groomed, It's just like, all the hair has been like perfectly groomed, all the buttons are perfectly buttoned. Not 100% because it's not a whole lot of sulfites. It's definitely not a conventional wine in any way, but it is a little more calm. But still, ton of personality. We'll talk a little bit more about that once we get to tasting. Speaking of tasting, let's get into it. So if you want to pull up the grid, let's go through the grid and I'll explain kind of how this works, and we'll go from there. So this is the grid, WACT Level 3 systematic approach to tasting wine. So grid is essentially what we call this format, this thing that we follow. And it is, like I mentioned last week, know that it is designed for blind tasting in an exam setting. This is a way that we are taught to analyze the wine, and oftentimes it's in a blind tasting setting, so we don't know what's in the glass. We just see the wine, and we're supposed to look at it, the appearance, smell it, the nose, taste it, the palate, and then put all the sensory information that you gather, put it all together, and come to some sort of conclusion. And at level 3 at WCT, we basically analyze it for how good the wine is, the quality, and the ageability of the wine. You can easily find that this is free. If you Google WCT level 3 grid or systematic approach to tasting wine, this will pop up. You can just download it. There's also level 2, level 1. There's also level 4. They're all different. We use level 3 here. But also the Court of Master Sommeliers, which is a different certifying body that does this. They also have their own grid. It's very similar to this. It's not that different, but if that makes more sense to you, you can use that. But here at 6 Foot Wine Club, we use a WCT level 3 grid because WCT is what I was trained on, and yeah, that's really the only reason. Okay, so let's go start from the top. I will say this also, for you veterans, you've heard me go off on this many times, but think of this as a very loose guide to tasting wine. I actually think tasting wine through the grid is a hindrance to actual joy of drinking wine. But it is also kind of fun to kind of talk through this and obviously taste it with somebody who's tasted wine for professionally for a long time. So you kind of you can compare your palate to mine and different things to see if you get it right. Like, I understand the appeal, I understand why it's fun, but at the end of the day, this is just think of it as a loose guideline. Don't live and die by this grid. Yeah, but I'll say that. And also, I find, especially with natural wine and things that we taste here at 6 Foot Wine Club and through this Beauj box, some of these flavors are going to be... this grid is really designed to taste conventional wines. It's not really meant to be tasting natural wines. So I find it quite limiting. I mean, all these words that you see, lexicon on the second page of the grid, these are the only words that you're supposed to use to describe wine. But it could be very different depending on your background, where you come from. Like, I'm Korean. I was born and raised in Korea. And sometimes I smell wine and it reminds of certain fermented products that I grew up with in Korea, but you can't talk about that, because this is a British body who came up with these words. Same thing if you grew up in Brazil, India, I don't know, some different parts of Jamaica, different parts of the world, and your sensory memories or reference points are something unfamiliar to the British palate or British people, then you're not going to find that on the grid. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means, is this right for whom is basically the question to ask, right? So at the end of the day, if you smell soy sauce on my mom calls soy sauce on sherries all the time. If you smell soy sauce, if you smell breadfruit, I don't know, if you smell different things from your childhood, call it out, and you're not wrong. So know that it's inherently very Anglo-Saxon, very much bit racist in fact. It's just it's a wine interpreted through the lens of white British people, Western Europeans, but that's what we have, so that's what we're going to work with. But again, don't think of it as a very strict thing, just use it as a loose guideline. But overall, how it's divided is 4 sections, like I mentioned: appearance, nose, palate, and conclusion. So appearance, we're going to just go down from the top. So appearance, obviously, the way the wine looks. Nose is how it smells. Palate is how it tastes. And then conclusion, you put it all together. So let's go from the top. All right, appearance. Pour yourself like a half a glass of wine. I would say like 2 to 3 ounces is perfect. And then you're gonna tilt it about 45 degrees, and you're gonna look through the deepest core of the wine. Natural light is the best, but obviously, if you have that, great. Right now I'm doing this recording at night, so I don't have that. So I have artificial lighting, which is not the best, but that's all I got. If you have like a white piece of paper, you can put it behind the wine. But if you don't have that, you can put your hand behind it as well. But first, we're gonna look at the clarity. I'm gonna say this wine is clear. Some wines, we're gonna see some probably in this box. You can tell that it has not been filtered, it has not been fined, it's going to be quite hazy. But this one, for all intents and purposes, seems pretty clear to me. I don't know if this wine has been filtered. I know it's for sure not fined, but it's not been filtered. It just maybe it has been racked off a few times. Racking means letting the wine settle, and then all the sediment gets to the bottom, and then you take the clear portion, and then you siphon it off to another vessel or container. That's called racking. Filtering is just like a cheat. It's just a faster way of racking, letting the sediment, getting rid of the wine, separating the sediments and the wine. But if you let the wine settle and give it time, you'd be surprised how clear the wine gets. So it may be just the function of this guy just letting the wine settle and then racking it. But clarity, this wine is clear. Intensity, If you can like completely see through and read everything behind it, that's like pale. This is talking about red wine. Medium is about kind of like you see it, but you know you can maybe read everything. And then deep is obviously like you can't really see through and then read anything. So I'm gonna call this about medium. I mean, it's not like super medium, maybe like lower than medium, but nonetheless, I'm gonna say this is medium. If I was on the exam setting, I'll call this medium. Color. I'm gonna call this ruby. This is about like textbook definition of ruby. Here you see on the red, you say purple. Not many wines in the world have that purplish, like bluish tone to it. Malbec is actually a good example, is that everybody knows. Malbec does get a little bit of that blue purplish tinge, but a lot of wines don't have that. So, like majority of wines we're gonna come across, red wines we're gonna come across is gonna be ruby. But once you start to age the wine, you start to see some of these kind of brownish color come in. That's where the garnet, tawny brown comes in. And also the white wine that's been aged for a long time and then has been exposed to oxygen, it also turns into brown. So, but for our purpose, I'm gonna call this ruby. Other observations here, they have legs and tears, deposit, pétillance, bubbles. So deposit, I don't see any deposits in my glass. This wine is no deposits, no bubbles in the wine. You know, pétillance is a French word for bubbles, so I don't see any bubbles coming up. Legs are tears. Here we go. This is where I get on my soapbox. Is if you swirl the wine and you let it kind of stand, you see these things coming down on the side of the glass? Those are called legs or tears. A lot of people confuse, you're gonna hear, I've heard it many times in restaurants, people come in like, oh my God, look at the gorgeous legs on this wine. This must be so good. Let me tell you, there's absolutely no relationship between quality and the legs or the tears. Legs and tears are a function, it's viscosity of the wine. It's a function of two things. It's the sugar level and alcohol level in the wine. Obviously, higher the sugar, more viscous the wine, syrupy, right? More viscous it becomes, so the legs or tears come down more slowly. More alcohol, same thing. It's comes down slowly. It kind of gives you a sense of that. But later, when we get to palate, we actually taste the wine for alcohol and as well as sugar, sweetness. So I have no idea why they would ever think us, they would want us to note the legs and tears and try to guess the function of what it does when we're verifying that later. To me, it is unnecessary, and then it's kind of a redundant, quite stupid actually. But that's what they want. So if you want to talk about tears, that's fine, but whatever you do, don't be that person that goes into a restaurant and say, oh my God, look at these beautiful legs. What a great wine this must be. If you say that, don't mention my name. You know, I'm just kidding, but yeah, it's just one of my pet peeves. Like people are like, "Oh my God, the legs and tears!" Like it doesn't tell you shit. It's just a viscosity of the wine. Okay. All right, nose. Give it a little swirl, and then first and foremost, you're gonna test for the condition, whether the wine is sound or if there's any kind of fault on it. Okay. So put your nose in it. You can do like a deep, slow breath, or you can do a bunch of short ones. I tend to be a long, slow breath guy, but I've seen people do it different ways, so you figure out what works better for you. But, all right, here we go. First of all, this wine smells amazing. Smells delicious, smells pretty. Yeah, smells awesome. This wine is clean, this wine is sound, meaning this one, there's no fault on this wine. Sorry. Corked, being corked. You may have heard some people talk about it. Being corked is the most common wine fault. It's a dirty cork. If the cork that went into the bottle is not fully sterile and it comes into contact with the wine, it can grow this bacteria inside the wine, and it's more common than you think it is. But it smells like wet cardboard, damp basement, wet newspaper. Once you smell it, you will know exactly what it is. It's like a matrix moment. Once you've smelled a corked wine, you will be able to call it out immediately. Obviously, there's a degree of it as well, but oftentimes it's hard to forget what corked wine smells like. It's not bad. It's not gonna make you sick or anything, but it's just that when it does, one, it just smells like, you know, wet cardboard. But two, it kind of mutes everything flavor wise. Like you can't really taste much. The wine just feels very locked up and non-expressive. So yeah, it's just not very fun to drink it, but it's not bad for you, for your body health. But that's the most common fault. There's obviously different things depending on the degree, really high volatile acidity, really high Brettanomyces. All these things could be a fault, but corked is probably the one that you need to look out for the most. But on this wine, I don't smell any of that. This wine smells clean. This wine smells sound. I do detect ever so slight, just a little bit, elevated level of VA, volatile acidity on this thing. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's still very clean, but there's a little bit of VA here. There's a more VA in last week's wine, but it's the one that kind of makes. It reminds me of like a balsamic vinegar. There's ever so slight tinge of like a balsamic vinegar in this thing, but for all intents and purposes, still very clean, very sound wine. Intensity. Give it a swirl. Start moving your glass towards your nose, and then notice when you start to smell the aromas. Like right there for me. So what is that, like a couple inches? So that's like bordering right on medium plus. So if your nose is like in the glass, like when you start to smell the thing, when you touch the glass or nose just off the rim, that's about medium. If it's a couple inches off, that's medium plus. If it's like way up, that's pronounced. Medium light, medium minus is like when you get your nose in there, you can't really smell it, and light is like, you know, it doesn't really smell like much at all. So for me, this is right there. So yeah, that's like 1 or 2 inches. So it's like right on that borderline between medium and medium plus. You can go to medium plus. You can stay in medium. You know, you decide. But on my purposes, I'm gonna call this medium plus. It's just a low. I also like to be generous if I'm ever splitting the difference. So I'm gonna call this a medium plus intense aromas of. On the next page, on the second page, this is where you're gonna go through and then call out things that you smell. Don't overthink this. Just go from the top and just go down. If you don't smell it, don't smell it. If you smell it, just call it out. Just, you know, it shouldn't take you a long time, like you're really sitting there analyzing everything. It should be just like whatever comes to you at first is basically what it is. So starting from the top, floral. I do get some floral. I have some like really beautifully fresh, like violet is kind of what I get. Very common thing with the Gamay, very common thing with the Beaujolais. We're going to talk a lot about violet, and some depending on which crew, and then the production method. Sometimes it's rose petals, sometimes violet, sometimes both. But like here, I get more violet here, really bluish, like purplish, like pretty flowers. No green fruit, no citrus fruit, no stone fruit, no tropical fruit really for me, and then red fruit. This is where I get some of these coming out. So I get some like red currant, I get some raspberry, red plum, like some of the definitely some like red fruit coming out here. I definitely also do get a little bit of like a black cherry. I don't get a whole lot of like black berries or plum or anything like that, but like the cherry here definitely seems to be more like a black cherry. But for the majority, this is very much of a red fruit driven with a touch of black cherry thrown in there is kind of what I get here. Next, the dry cooked fruit or the nature of the fruit. It tells you a lot about kind of what happened during the farming, during the vintage, right? Like if it's really, or you know, how they farmed it. If you, for example, if it was really hot, you know, one vintage, or if it comes from a really warm place in the world, the fruit character may seem very stewed and jammy and big because all that sugar aroma development happens really fast in a warm environment. Or if you pick the grape too late, or on the reverse, if you pick too early, or you come from a very cold place, or it was a very cold vintage, unusually cold vintage, you may get a lot of like unripeness. You make something green. You may get underripe fruit characters. So yeah, it tells you a lot about kind of like a farming and what happened during that vintage. to me, the fruit here is super fresh, super ripe, beautifully ripe. You know, there's nothing unripe about this. It's just like really, really good farming. It tells me that yeah, these guys really took a great care to farm these fruit correctly. So really ripe, really fresh, beautiful, beautiful fruit. All that, you know, raspberry, red currant, red plum, black cherry, all that things that I talked about. There's also a little bit of lift on the fruit. It's not just like regular fruit, but it just seems very like bright and light on its feet. I think that's some of that like VA playing the role. VA at the right amount can have this role of like kind of lifting the nature of the fruit out of the wine. So it's not just like black. You know, if we're to use a music analogy, like less of bass notes and more of like treble notes. It's just a little more ethereal up top. But the fruit here doesn't seem so like dark and heavy. It seems much lighter here. And then there's also a little bit of that confectionery, like candy, like hard candy, like I don't know, like Lifesavers or like some of those things. Like if you ever gotten like a black cherry, like hard candy, I guess some of the like confectionery things, and that's a sign of carboning. A lot of when you put wines through carboning, you do get some of these fruit characters that are not perfectly like natural fruit. It's more of a, like artificial, like the candied, high-toned fruit, and I do definitely get some of that here. No herbaceous or no herbal, nothing like savory edge here. Again, nothing unripe about this. Just really pretty, really fresh, really ripe. Yeah, herbaceous and herbal can come from the actual the grapes themselves. It's like some grapes have a high, naturally just have a high level of things like pyrazine, which is what's in a Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, right? These things give off like green grass or something green and jalapeno in a large amount. And those things can come from innately from the grape variety themselves, or it could be a cold vintage. It could be also the wine making itself. So if you do a whole cluster where you soak the stems and everything in the actual wine while it's fermenting, it could pick up a lot of that like spicy kind of herbaceous kind of a note. Skin contact also could do that as well. So production method also matters here, but also the innate kind of a varietal character can also come through. Also obviously the weather, climate, how cold it was and all that can all play into it. But here I don't really get much herbaceous, herbal kind of things in this wine. It's just really, really fresh and beautifully ripe. No spices, no black pepper, no white pepper, nothing like that. But minerality, the last one, the other. So for people who are new to wine, this is probably one of the hardest things to explain. It's not that like you plant grapevines on limestone and it's gonna smell and taste like limestone, or you plant it on granite, it's gonna smell like granite, or volcano. It's not that. But no one can, and there's no scientific proof that any of the mineral component from the soil actually makes it into the wine. Like there's no actual rocks in here. But no one can argue that the wines that are planted and grown on limestone, granite, and volcanic and sand, they all taste different. And or slate, and oftentimes you get these kind of like smells and tastes and textures that reminds you of rocks. And you may be wondering, like, how the fuck do you know what rocks taste like? And I shit you not, when I was training and coming up on wine, I've actually like licked and smelled and sucked on rocks like chalk and limestone, granite, just to get a sense of what the texture is like, what the river stone, like, what it tastes like. And I know that sounds weird, but if you haven't licked rocks, have you even really lived? Is my question. But I would say, yeah. So if you're really curious, I'd say go lick some rocks, and you may get a sense of what I'm talking about. But in general, there are these kind of rockiness in the wine, especially wines that are grown in very infertile, poor soil with not a whole lot of nutrients, with nothing but just like bedrocks. Those tend to get the most amount of kind of minerality. But I definitely get some like the granitic influence here all over. Yes. Have I had more granitic Beaujolais? Absolutely. And we are going to have some more of that in this box. But for a Beaujolais-Village, which is kind of like one up from the entry level, the fact that you're getting this much minerality, I have this like crushed granite rock everywhere on this glass. Like it is pretty awesome that you are able to get this on a Beaujolais Village. And again, just because it's Beaujolais Village doesn't mean that it's all gonna be just plonk or like the entry level stuff. Obviously, there is more complex and deeper kind of wines that exist out there, but like this is right next to Morgon. Like literally, it's just like skip and hop over from the demarcation line between Morgon and Beaujolais Village. So yes, it's not quite Morgon, but it's right next to it. It's very similar. It's like the satellite of Morgon. So the fact that it's not shocking to me that you are getting this much like granitic influence, you're getting this much kind of minerality in the wine, but it's awesome. With that background of the really ripe, fresh, high toned fruit, juxtaposed with this like a minerality, this crushed rock over top. It's quite lovely. All right, let's go to palate. So now we finally get to taste it instead of just talking about it and smelling it. All right, let's start from the top. Sweetness. So you're tasting for sugar in the wine. And for people who are getting started with wine, this is oftentimes a very hard thing. Even people who've been, tasting wine for a long time, our brain evolutionarily has been trained, programmed to think, associate sugar with the fruit or sweet smelling things, right? Like honey, certain flowers, certain fruits. When you smell it, we're like, oh, this smells sweet. But the truth is, sweet is not a smell. Like we can't smell sugar. You can only taste sugar, right? Taste is one of the five senses on our tongue. Like we cannot smell sweetness. You can only feel sweetness. So oftentimes when you get a wine that's very fruit forward, especially with that kind of sweet fruit and sweet flower, you may think that wine is very sweet. But now that you're starting to get trained in a real way of tasting wine, try to separate that power of suggestion, the evolutionary programming that you have in your brain, with just trying to shoot for how much sugar is present in this wine. Okay, so give it a swirl, take a little sip, move it all around, because but actually we'll get to that in acid. But with the sweetness, just detect for sugar. Okay. First and foremost, how fucking good is this wine? It's fucking delicious. It's so good. I love this wine. That's bringing smiles to my face. It's just playful. It's light. It's delicious. It's like everything I want in Beaujolais. It's cool. All right, sweetness. Just so you know, 95% of wines in the world, majority of wines in the world, are dry. Dry meaning lack of sugar. Sweet means presence of sugar. Again, 95% dry. So when in doubt, call it dry. There's no real I wish. So the sugar in wines measured in grams per liter, but there's no this scientific breakdown. Like dry is from 0 to 9 grams per liter. Off dry is 10 to 16. Like it would make things much easier, but it's not done like that. There's a lot of perceptive kind of thing coming in here as well, which is kind of frustrating, but also makes sense, especially when you're tasting wine. But here, all intents and purposes, this is dry. This is definitely, but in general, dry is about 0 to 9 grams, is I would say. Anything under 5, most human palates cannot detect sugar level under 5 grams per liter. So, again, you may think that this is sweet because all the fruit and everything on there, but this one is dry. There's no sugar. All the sugar from the fruit, from the grapes, have been fermented out, pretty much completely dry. Off dry, for American palate, this is honestly when you can noticeably detect sugar. Like you may even think it's like dessert wine. That's how it's true. But it's like 10, 11 grams up to like 16, 17 is what I say in general. Off dry, usually what it comes off. But with certain wines where the acid is really high, like German Riesling, like a Mosel Riesling, it may not come off that off dry, even though sugar may be like 13 grams per liter, but it may come off dry because the acid is just so high. Medium dry, you're definitely entering into a basically dessert wine zone for at least American palate. This is like the Spatlese in the German and Austrian Riesling world. But we're probably talking about, again, no exact measurement here, probably anywhere between like 18 to like 24, somewhere around there. Medium sweet, I don't know, 25 to like 32, 35. So it's going all the way up to lusciously sweet, which is like Tokai, like Hungarian dessert wine. Like these are we're talking about like 300 to 500 grams per liter of sugar. So we're looking at the wine, all the wines produced in the world, and then we're ranking them all in this like dry to lusciously sweet category. So most of the wines are going to fall in that dry category. 90 to 95%, more than 95% of the wines in the world are going to fall in that dry category. Acid. So move it around, take a sip, move it around, like Listerine the shit out of your mouth. You're going to trying to touch every corner of your mouth. But particularly for acid, you are going to feel it. I feel it in the back of my jaw right here. Some people feel it in their sinus. Some people feel it between their eyebrows. I've seen people feeling acid in different places. But for me, I feel it in the back of my jaw. So I like pay attention to how much is pulling. Also, another thing you can look for is how much saliva your tongue and your mouth starts to generate. Because the higher the acid, like imagine like biting into a lemon, right? How much water, how much saliva it will produce. So think about that. So acid. It's a good amount of acid here. I love that. Yeah, I'm gonna call this a medium plus. It's like lower than medium plus, but yeah, I don't want to go all the way into medium. This is more than medium, for sure. Good acid. Again, all that acid lifts up the wine, gives it, makes it alive, feel alive and lively, especially with all that juicy, fresh, ripe fruit to have that acidity. Delicious. Tannin. Move the wine around again, Listerine the shit out of your mouth, touch every corner of your mouth, and feel for a friction. There's some sort of grip that you're going to feel. If you ever wonder what tannin feels like, tannin is, by the way, polyphenolic, or it's a phenolic compound that exists in the skins, the seeds, and the stems of the grapevines. And if you ever like chewed on apple skins on its own, sometimes it has that kind of like a astringency as well as like a little bit of like a friction that you get from that. That's tannin. If you ever over steep green tea, if you put 2-3 bags of green tea and steep it for like 20 minutes in tea, take a sip of that tea, you're gonna feel tannin in your mouth. Or if you wanna suck on that tea bag, like you'll feel tannin. It is just like a grippy kind of a substance, a phenolic substance that exists on the grapes. So move it around, see what you get. I feel it all across my gum, all across that bottom too, top of my mouth and the roof as well. There's some tannin on this thing, for entry, level wine. This is not nothing. There's some textural component from that tannin. There's a minerality that we're talking about. Yeah, I'm gonna call this a medium tannin. Once you get this high tannin, you feel it. Like you will feel like if you ever tasted Tannat or like young Nebbiolo from Piedmont, you will feel that tannin. But this one, I'm gonna call it a medium. Alcohol. So move it around, take a sip, spit it out, drink it or whatever. Feel for the warmth in the back of your throat. And Chano, it's a fun game to play from now on. Whenever you taste wine, try to guess the percentage of the alcohol. So in general, medium is like 12, 12 and a half to like 13 and a half. Medium plus is like 14 and a half to 15, 14 to 15, and then highs are above 15. Medium minus is like 10 and a half to 11 and a half, and low is 10 and below. Essentially, it's kind of how I would look at it. And see, taste it, notice the warmth, and then check the ABV on the bottle. Every bottle has to have ABV written on it by law. And then you can start to kind of train your senses, to calibrate your senses. So to me, this feels like just like right down the middle, about like 12.5. Here you go, 13%. So it's right down the middle. That's medium. And then more and more you practice, more and more you can get better at kind of guessing that. But also alcohol. Sometimes like 15% alcohol, 16% alcohol wine does not drink like 16% alcohol, just because there are other things that balance it out. On the other side, there are wines that I've had that were like 10.5, 11%, but the alcohol just pops out because there's nothing to support that alcohol. So it's not just the alcohol itself, but there's a perceptive kind of a thing that comes across depending on what else is happening in the wine. But in general, try to see if you can guess kind of like the percentage of the wine by calibrating your warmth and the sensation that you get. Mousse we don't have to talk about. If it's sparkling wine, we'll talk about that, but we're not going to talk about mousse in this Beauj box because none of it is a sparkling wine. By the way, if any of these wines come across sparkling, you might get some like a dissolved CO2. Last week's wine had a little dissolved CO2, but without that. Anything higher than that, when it's like super sparkling, that something has gone wrong. It's not supposed to be sparkling. Flavor intensity. So give it a sip. See how easily you can pick out all the flavors, or how strongly the flavors come across. Yeah, I'm gonna call this like lower than medium plus. Again, it's like splitting somewhere between medium plus. So being generous, I'm gonna call this a medium plus. On the same level, maybe slightly lower than on the nose, but I'm still gonna call this medium plus. Medium plus aromas of, and this is where you kind of confirm everything that you smelled on the nose. Nose is the most important part, if you ask me, because you can smell a lot more things and then we can taste. Taste buds, again, we only have 5 sensations. And to me, we are tasting more for structure of the wine, so things like alcohol, body, tannin, acid, right? Not the actual flavor, like like is this raspberry, is it red cherry? For me, the tasting the wine is more for the structure. That's the important part. The smelling it is where you get all the aromatic compounds in the wine. All the fruit, all the flowers, and all the things, and also the condition of the wine. So on the palate, you're essentially just confirming everything that you smelled on the nose as far as the aromas and as far as the flavors go. And to me, I get everything that I smelled here. That pretty violet flower here, really juicy, really beautifully fresh and ripe red berries and black cherries. Some of that hard candy kind of like thing that I was telling you about. Yeah, like a black cherry candy. Like I get some of that. Definitely the sign of carbonic. And then again, that like beautiful, amazing granitic minerality coming through. That's kind of like what envelops it all, and then it hits me with that beautiful flower, and then the fruit, and then it kind of finishes with that kind of like crushed rock minerality running through. It's really beautiful. This is actually really, really well made wine. All right, and then finally, the last thing is the finish. How long is the length, or you may call it length? How long do the flavors stick around? So, take a sip. Sit there. God damn it, this is delicious. Keep going. But about there. It's not super long. The finish here is what leaves me wanting more than anything else. I mean, complexity, all of that. Especially Beaujolais-Villages. It's not. I'm not expecting the most complex thing, but the finish, I wish it was a little bit longer. But I'm gonna call this about medium finish. So it kind of depends on how long it is. So again, trying to calibrate your senses. This is about medium. However long you felt it is what I call this, the finish on this. So finally, conclusion. This is where you put it all together and then kind of think about what it all means. So quality level. Quality is a function of four things. Balance is the first and foremost the most important, and then complexity, intensity, and length. So let's go through each one of those. Balance. Is this wine balanced? Meaning, is everything harmonious? Is there anything here that sticks out, kind of overwhelming? It kind of interferes with you experiencing other things in the wine, other aromas and things. And I don't think so. I think, in fact, this is very, very harmonious, very well balanced wine. There's nothing that's sticking out. Everything is in sync. Everything is in harmony. It's a beautiful, beautifully balanced wine. Intensity, we call it medium plus on the nose. We called it medium to medium plus, but being generous, let's go medium plus. So we're gonna call this medium plus intensity. Complexity, we had flower, violet. We have red berries, right? Red currant, raspberry, red plum, black cherry, things like that. And then minerality, all in the primary, nothing in the secondary, nothing in the tertiary. So not hugely complex. So I'm gonna call this about like lower end of medium. Call this about medium. And then the length, we call it medium as well. So when you put all those four things together, this is balanced wine with a medium plus intensity, with a medium complexity, and a medium length. So when you take an average of all of those things, we're kind of landing in somewhere between medium plus, right? Two mediums and one medium plus, but closer to medium than we're to medium plus. So if that average is medium, then we call it good. If that average is medium plus, we call it very good. If that average is high or pronounced, then we call it outstanding. And then if the average is medium minus, we call it fair or acceptable. And then if that's low, if the average is low, then it's poor, and a faulty just means there's something wrong with the wine. So given all of that, we got two mediums, medium plus, closer to medium. So I'm gonna say this is good. Had this wine had a little more complexity, had this wine had a little more length, I think it would have pushed it. If either one of those things, if the length was a little bit longer or it had a little more complexity, and we got one more medium plus on one of those things, this would have pushed this wine into very good territory. But for where this wine is right now, I'm gonna call this good. Potential for aging. Level of readiness for drinking and potential for aging. So in order for wines to age, you need two things. You need the structure, which is acid and tannin essentially, and then you also have the flavor, the intensity, and the complexity. So let's talk about the structure part first. So we're talking about acid and tannin. This wine had medium plus acid, we called it, and then medium tannin. So pretty decent backbone. It's not like high tannin, high acid. But decent, right? Medium plus tannin. Medium tannin and medium plus acid. Those things are essentially like serve as a backbone. So all the flavors to stick to, so it doesn't fall apart. So pretty decent backbone. And then let's talk about flavor. So flavor intensity and then flavor complexity. Intensity-wise, we call it medium plus on the nose and then medium on the palate. So somewhere between medium plus, not a hugely intense, but decent, right? Again. And then the complexity, we call it medium. So what happens in the wines is that all those primary things that we were talking about, fruit and flowers and all those things, as the wines age, that becomes, ages and becomes a non-fruit and non-flower things. So like leather, earth, wet leaves, meaty, like things like that, tobacco. So things like that happen on a tertiary when the bottle has been aged and has gotten aging. There is such thing as aging the wine too long, and most wines are not going to age for that long, nor is it meant to be aged. the point of aging, or the best thing to do, is to catch the wine right at the apex of that aging. So right, so like if this is like if the aging is an arc, right? This is a fresh, young and fresh, and then this is old and tired. You want the wine to kind of evolve, and then once it gets to the kind of the peak, the full moon position right in the middle is when you want to drink that wine. Because you got all this freshness, primary fruit, and that's the only thing. Like not much complexity, but a ton of intense, like a fruit and then primary fruit. And as it ages, you're gonna get to this middle where you're gonna get both of the freshness of the primariness and the freshness of the fruit, but you're also gonna start to see some like tertiary meatiness and the non-fruit things, making the complexity much greater, right? But then, as it goes into the second half of this evolution, the wine goes into the second evolution. Now you can get to a point where you lose all that freshness, and all you're left with is just non-fruit things, and that's also not delicious. And also, complexity goes down, right? Because you're not experiencing both things. So the whole point is to catch it right in this, like the half, full moon kind of apex. And for this wine, yes, it has some decent backbone. It has a decent intensity. So all the intensity is going to hold on to the freshness, but also going to turn into tertiary. But it's not meant for like long-term aging. For this wine to be aged for a long time, it would need much more tannin. It would need much more acid. So given that, I would say, and also this wine is drinking beautifully right now. Like what makes this wine delicious is the fact that it's fresh. It's ripe and it's juicy, and that's exactly what Beaujolais-Villages is supposed to be. It's not meant for this like huge long-term aging, but it's more for short to midterm aging, or drinking right now. Like I would drink this gladly right now, but given the amount of tannin, acid, and the complex intensity on this thing, I would say you have no problem. This wine, I don't think this wine is gonna fall apart anytime in the next 5 years. So I say pick up, I don't know, 4 to 6 bottles or whatever if you like the wine, and then drink it over the next 5 years, and you can kind of start to see some of the evolution and what the aging does to the wine. But in general, it's not meant for a long-term aging, is what I would call this one. Cool. So that's essentially how you go through the grid, and we're gonna do that in each recording. In a live tasting, we're actually going to take turns having people pick one section and practice it. If you join us on the live call, fourth call of each month. But yeah, so if you have any questions, if you have any disagreements, shoot me an email and let me know. I'd love to talk you through it or talk about it. Cool. Last thing that's left is to play the guessing game on the price of this wine. So if you want to do that, if you want to think about it, pause the recording right now and come back to it in a second. But the wine in the retail shelf, this wine is $25.50. I think it's a fantastic wine for $25.50. I think it's a lot more wine than $25. I've got a lot more complexity, a lot more wine that you get. It's punching way above its price point. It's delicious, it's juicy, it's fresh, it's everything I want from Beaujolais. The immediate kind of approachability, but it also has that like tannin. It also has a textural component, and that all that minerality, the granite that comes through. It's a really, really nice bottle of Beaujolais-Villages, and at $25.50, I'd be stoked to get a Beaujolais like this. So yeah, good value. And that's oftentimes Beaujolais-Villages is where you're going to find a whole lot of value, right? Again, is it the Ferrari of Beaujolais? Of course not. It's not meant to be that. But this Beaujolais-Villages is like the Toyotas, the Hondas of Beaujolais. It drives well. It keeps some age. It's interesting. It's actually fun to drive. It's not a piece of shit car. It's not like a, what is that car in high school? I remember my friends used to drive Ford Taurus. Like that shit used to break down like every 1,000 miles. Like fuck Ford from the 90s, you know. Um, yeah, so this is that. It's fun to drive. It's a great car. It's a really well made car, but it's not like it's not a Ferrari. It's not an Audi. It's not a BMW. Um, and if you're not a car person, I'm sorry that I use that analogy, but I think you get the idea. Beaujolais-Villages, especially if you do the homework and find the right producer who is like literally just outside Morgon. I mean, you saw the kind of entire western northern half of Beaujolais is Beaujolais-Villages. So it really depends on where you are and what they're doing. But if you find the right producer who are just outside of a really famous cru like Morgon, and then planted on the hills and farmed correctly, things like that, then you get these beautiful Beaujolais-Villages at a fraction of the cost of what you find in other crus. So excellent. That's it. That's all I got for you. Cool. Just hit the 1 hour mark. Again, a long one, but I promise starting from next week, it won't be as long as this. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, enjoy your weekend, and I will see you next week. Toodles.